So I think how does scent enrich human life? I just think it brings colour, it brings dimension, it brings emotion. You kind of, you know, when you think of our lives, I remember when my son was born and he was put in my arms for the first time, and I had been so sick having him. I had something called hyperemesis. And so I was really, really poorly. And the minute he was put in my arms, and I remember smelling just the smell of a newborn baby. I can't capture it, I can't create it, I've tried, I can't do it. It just doesn't exist. And there are certain smells that just bring that sense of humanness. And in the last 2 years during the pandemic, people have looked at their four walls in their homes. They've been their schoolrooms, their cinemas, their gyms, their restaurants, their place of work. And you can't change it. You can't change the way four walls look, but if you change the fragrance, the whole persona of that living space changes. You could bring the outdoors indoors, the indoors outdoors. Each floor can have a different smell. You can have that sense. I remember when my son was really tiny, and we would travel a lot on planes and go from time zone to time zone. And when he first came home, I would create a cologne that I've never sold, and we still use it at home, and it was just a tiny bit, and I would put it onto his pyjamas when he went to bed, and it was just a tiny bit. But from a very, very young age, he learnt that that smell meant sleep. So when we got onto a plane, I'd put his pyjamas on, touch his pyjamas with this really light sort of citrusy, it's like a really, really fine orange cologne, not heavy in any way, and he'd immediately know that it was sleep time. And guess what went with him to university? A bottle of sleep cologne. So the power of smell can be so much more than just a nice scent to put behind our ears or on our wrists. So as I've explained, scent to me is not just something I smell. It's a language. It's a means of communication. I'm telling you stories of my life through the power of the sense of smell and notes. And I look at each note as though it has a character and a personality. For instance, orange blossom makes me smile. Grapefruit makes me feel like I could do anything in the world. And oud and vetiver just means strong, strength, character notes. The smell of bergamot oil, the smell of limes and lemons, that citrus, often a very cologne type smell that brings cleanness. People often, which is why people love it in home care, is because that smell of cleanness, it makes you just feel just kind of relaxed and not too heady. So I think one of the senses of smell is the sense of home, isn't it? All of our homes have a smell to them. So my home smells of pomelo. I have all white wooden floors, and they're washed every day with a very, very dilute pomelo. And when I walk in, I can smell home. And a few years ago, we had a terrible fire in our house, and our house burnt down. And we left with literally the clothes we were standing in, and we had to go and live somewhere else. And my son, again, was going off to school, and he said, "Mom, I'm so sad, I miss my home, I don't want to go to school." And I said, "Darling, go to school, and I promise you when you come home, this will feel like home." And we'd rented an apartment. He went out, and I went and got as many bottles of pomelo as I could find, and I washed this house from top to bottom. Went to pick him up from school. He was only 7, and he walked through the door and he went, "It smells of home, Mum." And so pomelo, yet again, comes to the rescue. But I think the smell of our home is a really important. Not everyone's home smells of pomelo, but you might be your garden. It might be your mum or your other half cooking in the kitchen. It might be the smell of Sunday lunch. It might be the smell of Christmas morning with the Christmas tree. Your home is an encyclopedia of all kinds of different smells. And I think that is one of the most important life-enhancing and life security feelings that we have, the sense and the smell of home. The sense of smell isn't about something that's in a bottle. It's so much more than that. And if we start to explore that sense of smell, we'll start to understand other cultures and other people. And what we'll find is it brings us together. And I am all for finding things that bring everyone together and hearing everyone's story. And can you imagine if we told all the stories in life through the sense of smell, there would be far much more that unites us than divides us. So people always ask me two questions. What is your favourite note, Jo? And what is the fragrance you hate the most? I cannot and will not ever hate another fragrance. Why? Because it's someone else's creation, and just because I don't like it doesn't mean someone else won't like it. And it's fragrances like art. You can look at a Monet or a Picasso and some will be drawn to one and not the other. But some of the ingredients I don't like using is vanilla. Irritates me like there's no, it's like a person that just is shouting in your ear the whole time. Vanilla is not an ingredient I like to use in fragrance for Jo Loves or anything I create. It's a bully. It likes to take over, it's sweet, it's that sort of stickiness. But what I do like is I like the little pods in a vanilla. Because why? Because that vanilla can actually bring stability. It can be one of those platforms of wood. If you were to mix it with a cedar wood or a vetiver or like oak wood, anything like that, the actual sweetness of the vanilla tones down the wood. So it's the only time I would use vanilla. But as a top note, a middle note, no thank you. I'll leave that to other people to use. So there are certain notes that people will always love. They love the smell of orange blossom. You know, orange blossom is like the south of France. There's a beautiful little place in the south of France called Grasse, which is where it's the home of fragrance, really. It's where it was all created. And there's a little tiny perfume museum in the little square in Grasse, and it's so pretty. And it has a little garden. And in this garden, there are the rose de Mai and orange blossom trees. And I promise you, in the month of May, if you were to stand in this little garden and it's all terracotta walls and turquoise shutters, and the smell of the orange blossom is one of the, it's so rich, it's so regal, but it's so simple. And it's so beautiful and it's ageless. It's just the most incredible smell. That smell of orange blossom, people love it universally round the world. The smell of jasmine. That smell of jasmine just after the rain, that watery feel of that heady white blossom. Other notes that people like are things like roses. I mean, roses are universal, and my goodness, we have an orchestra of roses that we can use. You can use a Norma Jean rose, a rose de Mai, big, huge red, sort of like really deep red roses, country roses. Country roses have the most beautiful, almost tea note to them. And we have something called a tea rose, which has this really lingering rose, but this wonderful watery, sort of like, almost like burnt tobacco tea leaf smell. One of the fragrances I created for Jo Loves was one called White Rose with Lemon Leaves. And I was asked to create a fragrance that depicted the Union Jack in Great Britain. And I thought, well, how can I do this? And I thought about roses, white roses. And I used the white Norma Jean rose, which is like this huge bucket, like cabbage white rose, and it has a real sweetness to it. But I didn't want it to be too heady. I wanted the white roses to signify the British people and how we have them at weddings. The Queen has them in her garden. My son used to bring them every Friday night for dinner and place them on the dining table for the weekend. So white roses have a really powerful message to me. And then through it, I sliced these wonderful fresh lemon leaves. And that fragrance is the Union Jack, white rose and lemon leaves. We all look at people who are successful and have these great brands and think, you know, is there a blueprint? Is there something that we can copy, that we can learn from? Well, we can all learn from each other. And it's so important to share our stories of success, because when you hear it, you believe, if they can do it, I can do it. So always share your stories, no matter even if you think that they're not that of value to anyone. Let me tell you, there will always be a value to someone and help someone. But I remember holding my ground. I was sitting in a meeting and everyone had disagreed with me over something. And I sat there and I thought, do I yield? Do I step back? Do I take back what I believe? No, I'm going to stay true to who I am. And I did. And in fact, the chairman of the board at that time turned around and said, I think Jo is right. She's right in that decision, and that's the decision that we'll go with. And it taught me a lot that day. Stand true, stand tall to who you are and what you believe, and don't be compromised by other people's opinions and expectations of who you should be or who you shouldn't be. Your dreams belong to you, you follow them and you hold on to them. And that is exactly what I've done all the way through my life. But in order to build a brand, you have to be prepared to make mistakes. You have to try things, you have to push those boundaries. Always remember, the doorstep to success is often when you stand in failure. Why? Because you sometimes learn or look at a situation from a whole different perspective. Do not be frightened of failing. Be frightened of never trying. So after all of these stories and all of these lectures, maybe you're sitting there thinking, oh, I love that job. Let me tell you, those people who become perfumers and noses, they work really hard for a long period of time and years often. What do you need to become anything in life? You need a dream. But in order to make your dreams come to fulfillment, you need to make a plan, you need to have a strategy, and you need to put that into place. So if you want to become a perfumer, you have to look at maybe contacting one of the big fragrance houses, and they have wonderful schemes and 2-3 year openings where they'll take young perfumers and train them, and then go out into the world and start creating. Don't wait for the right moment, it'll never come. Start creating. And so I'm not a nose. I didn't go for years and years, but I had this natural ability to smell. And who knows, maybe you've got it too. Maybe you could change the world with fragrance. But if it's not about building a fragrance brand, but you want to be part of that entrepreneurial process, remember that everybody has that entrepreneurial piece to them. So maybe it's becoming part of someone else's brand and learning about the stories. My team, a lot of them come in and they come and work for us, and then they go off on other adventures with fragrance, because what happens is they start to fall in love with the power and the language of fragrance, and that is life-changing.